Okie dokie, we are ready to start implementing our application, our message board with Reflux and React and jQuery to make HTTP requests. So as sometimes I like to do, I want to start from the bottom, from overseeing the big picture. So I would just render what elements I want to see on my web page. So that would be a header, a footer, and I'm using get element by ID, and I'm using IDs of header and footer. Those containers must be in my index.html file. And then the message board itself with the form to add new messages and with the list of messages, it will be rendered into the message dashboard. Not the dashboard, but just message-board. Okay, so far so good. So now I want to go back into the top of the file and declare some of the variables that I'll be using across my application. One of those variables would be the location of my RESTful API. Right now it's just localhost post 3000. If I want to deploy it to some server on a cloud, that URL would change, and this is a place, just one place, instead of having it across multiple components. And then I'm creating an object, it's called actions. I'm using create actions from the Reflux class or Reflux library. And it takes an array of strings. So each string, it's the name of the action. I would have two actions. One is load messages, which will load the list of the messages to populate my table on the web page. And then I would have add message, which will facilitate the creation of a new message after I submit the form. So now I can go ahead and implement the data store with Reflux. That store will be synced to our component, and component will automatically get the data from this store. And also the XHR and AJAX requests will be submitted from this store. So I'm using reflux.create store, and then I'm using listenables. So listenables, it's like a mixin, it's a convenience. I'm just passing that action objects, and then I can use the convention. The convention is to create methods based on the action names. Init will put some initial objects. I just want to see something before I get the data from the server. Get initial state, similar to the React component. We can set some of the initial states right here. So for now, this .messages would be just that one hard-coded message. And the messages array will have the list of all messages. That's what we'll be using for the table of messages. So on load messages, it's one of those conventions where you capitalize the first character, you capitalize the L in load messages, and then you add on. You prefix with ON. And then on load messages, I'm submitting an AJAX request. It's a GET request, and the most important thing here on line 18 is that I need to trigger. I need to call this .trigger. Same thing, same convention with on add messages. It's the action name capitalized and prefixed with ON. In this example, I'm not using bind, I'm using _this just to show you that you have 2 or 3 options how to properly use this keyword this when you're working with closures. Because if you don't do that, the value of this will change inside of the closure, and right now we're inside of the closure, inside of the callback of the post request. So post request creates a new message. That's why we're passing the message in our post method. And then I'm using unshift. Unshift is similar to push, but only it works in the beginning. So it adds a new record in the beginning of the array. And then obviously, of course, I also need to trigger this. So let's go over it one more time. Listenables colon actions. That will enable me to use this notation. If If I don't use listenables, I have to manually attach actions to the methods, which I don't want to do. I want it to happen automatically, and Reflux will do it for me as long as I provide as long as I provide the actions objects to the listenables property. And then once I'm done with my asynchronous either the submission of the data or the fetching of the data, the way I tell the data store that, hey, this asynchronous function is done, I'm triggering this.trigger, and then I'm passing some data. So you have two options, at least two options illustrated here. You can use .bind, or you can transfer the scope with _this. If you're using ES6, you can use fat arrows, so if you don't like underscores, you can use that equals this or self equals this. Or you can name it, for example, message store equals this. That's even better because now you know what this refers to. So let's move on. The next object I'm implementing is the largest component. It's the actual message board component. Header and footer would be really simple, very static and stateless, but message board, that's where all the action is happening. So first of all, I want to connect my data store to this component, so I will get all the data, all the store's states in my states of this component. This is how I will be able to get the list of messages to submit new messages to the data store. So in the component will mount, so component will mount happens right before this component is mounted to the browser view, to the real DOM. I'm calling actions.loadMessages. So actions is a global variable, global object, and then load messages, it's my action. Then I'm just outputting my render. In the render, I'm using two components, new messages, that takes the messages property, which is you don't really need it, so you can skip that, and then add message CB or callback. CB stands for callback. So that's important. You need to pass your action. So basically I'm taking the actions that are associated with the data store and passing it as a property to new messages. Then in new messages you would see that I'm just triggering it on my event handler. And the message list, it's the list of messages or a table that we also need to implement. It takes the property messages, which is coming from the state, this.state.messages. So by doing the connection and the mixin with Reflux, I automatically get the list of messages here. So this name matches this name. If I change it to something else, like messages to, I also need to change it to messages to. Okay, the next component, new message, looks long, but really there's nothing complicated. Just some HTML via JSX and add message method. So this add message, it's a local method that will trigger the action that is a property of new message component. So before we do that, I'm creating an alias. fd is a React DOM.find DOM node, and then in the props I have that add message CB, which is the actions.addMessage, and I'm invoking it and passing an object with the name and the message, and I'm using find DOM node with the references, name and message are the refs, and I'm getting the values. So basically I'm passing a new message to that function, to that action from the Reflux data store. Then I'm wamping out clean the message and the name. Probably I should keep the name, because in most of the cases it would be the same person sending the subsequent messages. Key up, it's a method that will enable me to submit the message on the enter, and the enter code is 13, so I'm checking, okay, if this is enter, then go ahead and execute add message, the local add message. So now the render function, I'm returning a div, and then inside of that div I would have the input boxes for the name and for the message text, and then a link which will become a button via the Twitter Bootstrap styles that will do the submission of the data. Well, and form inline, the Twitter Bootstrap classes, well, we'll make it gray, and form inline will position the components on the same line instead of stacking them horizontally, stacking them vertically. Okay, so the input box. The important thing here is that it has the ref. Ref equal name. Ref equals name. That's how we can get the value of this input box. Then the second input would be the message text. Again, I'm using inputs-small as a class. That's coming from Twitter Bootstrap. And the ref would be message. Again, it's important to have refs here because that's how we get the information that we can submit to the server. In the send button, I'm using onClick event handler and the local this.addMessage method that will trigger the action from the Reflux. The next component is message list. Message list will create a table that will output the existing messages in our message board. We start with React.create class, and then right away, we don't have any methods. Right away, we are implementing render function. Var messages equal this.props.messages, just for convenience, so we don't have to type this.props every time. So first of all, I want to check if the messages has at least one message. So .length more than 0. .length, it's a array property. So if it doesn't have any messages, I want to output no messages. I don't want to show an empty table. That's not really pretty. But if it has at least one message, if that array has at least one item, then I want to return a table. And I'm using table and table dash bordered. Those are Twitter Bootstrap classes. And it's nice to have a caption. You don't really have to. Same thing with the T head. Stands for table header. The only interesting thing that we'll see later here is that how we iterate through the messages to generate that list. So the second column would be message, the first column is name. I'm closing the head, so now I can implement the t-body or the body of the table. So I'm starting with the curly braces and I'm using map on messages. Inside of the iterator, I'm returning a row, so t row is a row, and then I'm putting a key on each row to make React be able to optimize this list. Instead of iterating through it each time it needs to get the row, it will use the hash with IDs. And id_id, it's something unique that Mongo database automatically creates for me. So I don't need to worry about it. It will already be as a property of each message. And then the first cell, the first column is the name of a person, and the second column is the message that that person submitted. So I'm closing my iterator, closing the tbody, closing the table. I also need to get rid of these extra elements. So now we're done pretty much with the message board. We need to go and implement header component. Header equals React.createClass. And then right away we are rendering. So it's very stateless, very declarative. So there's not much going on in this component except the good thing about it that we can reuse it. If we put it in a different file, we can reuse it in different scripts, different other components. Similar to the header component, the footer component just have some JSX elements, no methods. You could use something that's called stateless components. We'll explore them in chapter 10 of React Quickly. For now, don't want to overwhelm you. It's just a simple React component without any methods, but with the render function. So the footer will have a small attribution, and the header had the heading, which says message board. Target equals _blank. We'll open this link in a new window. Now just closing all the tags and parentheses. Okay, so we're done with app.jsx. Just a quick overview. I have actions object, and I'm using create actions from Reflux library, and then I'm using that actions objects in the listenables property of the data store that I've created using Reflux create store, and that enables me to use this notation on and then the action name, on load messages and on add message. I can perform any type of asynchronous operations. So I'm submitting AJAX or XHR requests to my server, and once I'm done, I'm using this .trigger. So this is a message store. And then in my component, I'm plugging in that message store, and I'm telling this mixin like, hey, this is where I want you to put this data. And then I just use it as any other state. I pass it around and I iterate over it in a message list, for example. I'm creating a row for each of the item in that array. So that's pretty much it. Let's go and start this project. One more thing I didn't show you, but I had it running. I had the MongoDB here, which I started with MongoD without it. Let me just show you. If I try to start it, it will bork. So if you see Mongo error connection icon refused, 127.0.0.1, 27.0.17, that means you don't have the MongoDB running. You need it running locally on your default port, which is 27.0.17. And now it's not complaining, it's not crashing. If I go here, refresh it, and it works. That's it for this project. Thank you for watching.